A priest in ancient Babylon inscribes cuneiform onto clay, unaware he's making the last recorded mark in a script that ruled 3 millennia. Within a century, cuneiform vanishes completely, erased not by conquest, but by the alphabet's ruthless efficiency. For 3,000 years, cuneiform owned the written world. From 3200 BCE until the 1st century CE, this wedge-shaped script, pressed into clay with a reed stylus, recorded everything that mattered in Mesopotamia and beyond: laws, prayers, inventories, love letters, the Epic of Gilgamesh itself. At its peak, around 1800 BCE, cuneiform was the lingua franca of empires. Kings in Egypt corresponded with Babylonian rulers using it. Merchants in the Levant kept accounts in it. The script could represent not just Sumerian, its native language, but also Akkadian, Hittite, Ugaritic, at least 15 different languages across 3 continents. In the Great Library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, founded around 668 BCE, scribes catalogued over 30,000 cuneiform tablets and fragments. These weren't luxury items. They were infrastructure. An Egyptian official needed cuneiform to trade. A Babylonian farmer needed it to pay taxes. A priest needed it to preserve ritual knowledge across generations. The script was demanding. Students spent years learning its 600+ signs, but it worked. It was efficient enough to run empires. It was flexible enough to capture poetry. It was durable enough to outlast stone. For a scribe in Babylon around 50 CE, cuneiform was simply how writing worked. The idea that it might vanish within a generation would have seemed absurd. Yet by then, the alphabet was already winning, spreading silently through trade routes, easier to learn, faster to write, and carrying with it a new language, Aramaic. What no one could predict was how complete the erasure would be. By 330 BCE, when Alexander the Great conquered Babylon, cuneiform was already a language for specialists only. The script had survived empires, Sumerians, Akkadians, Hittites, Persians, but it could not survive practicality. Alphabetic writing was faster. A scribe learning cuneiform spent years memorizing 600 signs. Aramaic required perhaps 30 letters. The Persian Empire, which ruled from 539 to 331 BCE, made the choice official. Aramaic became the administrative language across all satrapies, from Egypt to India. Cuneiform retreated. It survived in temples. It survived in priestly schools. But it stopped spreading to new generations of bureaucrats who had better things to do than master wedge marks on clay. The Seleucid dynasty, which inherited Mesopotamia after Alexander's death in 323 BCE, continued the policy. They built libraries in Greek. They encouraged papyrus over clay. By 100 BCE, cuneiform texts were rare enough to be archaic. By 50 BCE, the last priest who could read the old temple hymns fluently was dying, and no one young enough to matter was learning to replace him. This wasn't conquest by the sword. It was replacement by memo. It was the triumph of the efficient over the traditional, the new over the irreplaceable. And yet, in the rubble of Nippur and Uruk, something remained, something that would lie buried for 2,000 years, waiting for a British archaeologist to realize what had been lost, and exactly when. The death of cuneiform was not sudden. It was erasure by 1,000 small decisions. By 100 BCE, cuneiform was already a language of the past, kept alive only in temples, in priestly schools, in the hands of men who knew they were preserving something dying. The alphabetic scripts had won. Aramaic, written in simple lines that a merchant could learn in months instead of years, had become the administrative language across Mesopotamia, Persia, and beyond. Cuneiform demanded dedication. Aramaic demanded only ambition. The shift accelerated after 63 BCE, when Pompey the Great brought Roman legions into Syria and Mesopotamia. Political power shifted westward. The great cuneiform libraries of Babylon and Uruk were no longer centers of empire, they were relics. By 50 C, the last known cuneiform text was inscribed. A priest named Obsolete recorded an astronomical observation in the old script. Then silence. We know almost nothing about what happened next. Did the final cuneiform scholars die without training successors? Did they choose to let the script go? The historical record abandons us here. What we do know is that within 3 generations, a single human lifetime stretched across a few decades, the ability to read and write cuneiform simply ceased to exist. The clay tablets that had documented 3 millennia of human thought, law, astronomy, and prayer became unreadable objects. Cuneiform did not fade gradually across centuries. It vanished in decades. By the time Islamic scholars began collecting manuscripts in Baghdad, 1,000 years later, no living person on earth could read the wedge marks. The script had become pure archaeology, and no one even knew it was lost, because no one remained who remembered it existed. For nearly 2,000 years, cuneiform simply vanished. Not gradually, not with fanfare. It evaporated from living memory so completely that when Greek and Roman writers looked at Mesopotamia, they saw only ruins, inscribed with symbols they could not read and could not explain. The last cuneiform scribes died around 50 CE. We don't know their names. No records mark their passing. But after them, silence. The knowledge of how to read wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay became, quite literally, a dead language. Schools that had taught cuneiform for 3 millennia simply closed. The priesthoods that maintained the tradition fragmented under Parthian rule. By 100 C, perhaps a handful of elderly scholars in Babylon could still parse the old texts. By 200 C, there were none. What remained were artifacts without interpreters. Tens of thousands of tablets lay in ruins, legal documents, literary epics, astronomical calculations, administrative records spanning 30 centuries. They were worthless to the new world that alphabets had built. When Arab scholars inherited these sites in the 7th century, they saw only curious baked clay. Some tablets were ground into powder and used as fertilizer. Others were simply buried deeper beneath the sand. The whole cuneiform left was not one of nostalgia. It was one of lost infrastructure, an entire apparatus of knowledge, how to organize empires, how to compose poetry, how to record the movements of stars, had evaporated. The alphabetic world that replaced it moved faster, traveled lighter, required fewer years of training. But it had severed itself completely from everything that came before. For 18 centuries, no one could read a single word of Mesopotamian civilization. Then, in 1835, a French scholar named Eugene Burnouf would examine a stone inscribed with 3 languages and discover that the middle inscription, long dismissed as meaningless marks, contained a name that would change everything: Darius. What remains of cuneiform today fits in a handful of rooms. The British Museum holds 130,000 tablets. The Louvre holds 5,000 more. Yale University, the University of Pennsylvania, Istanbul, all possess fragments of the world's first writing system, yet almost no one alive can read them without scholarly training. Between 50 CE and 1835, cuneiform vanished so completely that European scholars believed it was merely decorative, meaningless marks pressed into clay by a forgotten people. It took Eugene Burnouf's insight about Darius's name to begin the reversal. By 1857, Henry Rawlinson had translated the Behistun inscription's Old Persian section. Within decades, the middle script, Elamite, yielded. But Akkadian cuneiform remained locked until 1872, when George Smith identified the flood narrative in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Suddenly, the script was no longer mute. It spoke of kings and gods and ordinary debts owed to temples. Yet the knowledge required to read it died with the last priests around 50 CE. What we recovered was not cuneiform as the Babylonians knew it, alive, evolving in daily use. We recovered cuneiform as archaeology, as text without voice, as message without messenger. Today, fewer than 200 people worldwide can read cuneiform fluently. The script that governed 3 millennia of empire lasted only as long as the men and women who held its keys chose to keep teaching it. And when they stopped, when the last scribe set down his stylus for the last time, they could not have known that their silence would last 1,900 years. But one question still troubles scholars who work with these tablets. If cuneiform could disappear so utterly, so completely, what other knowledge might vanish from human memory tomorrow? The death of cuneiform teaches us that dominance means nothing against simplicity. Another file is already open, the Roman alphabet's own reckoning with digital text. If you're tracking what disappears, subscribe to the archive.